Okay, good morning and welcome to the Friends of Calligraphy lecture series that we are so happy to be able to present every couple months. It's wonderful to see everybody from around the world. So I'll say good morning, but it may be good afternoon or good evening to some of you. We're happy to welcome Laurie Doctor, who will be giving her talk this morning on the imagination of a maker, finding your way through impossible tasks. Laurie, as you know, Laurie loves to write, to do calligraphy, to do lectures, and to paint, and obviously much more. At this point, I'm going to turn it over to her. But before I do, just a couple of housekeeping items. One, please stay muted the whole time. If you have questions for the talk, we would ask you to please start your question with 3 question marks at the beginning, not at the end. But before you start your question, please start it with 3 question marks so that we know it's a question for Laurie to answer. We may periodically interrupt and ask one of your questions if it's pertinent. Otherwise, most of the questions will hold till the end. This presentation, as you now know, is recorded, and we'll be sending out the link to you. And I'm going to ask my co-host to please go through and mute people that have come in late. Let me just do another mute all because we've added quite a few people. Laurie, so you and I will have to unmute. Let me just hit mute all again. Okay, so good morning and welcome. And Laurie, I'm going to turn it over to you. And I'm going to spotlight you also before I forget. So hold on 1 minute until I find you again. All right, we can see your beautiful slide. You are on.
I'm on?
Yes, and we can hear you. Good.
Okay. Thank you so much for coming. I recognize so many of you, and it means a lot to see you here. I hope you'll enjoy this presentation and join in. It reminds me that we're all in this together. And first, I want to thank also the Friends of Calligraphy, Nancy Noble, Elena Carruthers, Rayol, and Evelyn, all the people that made it possible to do this and get us all together. It's a regular, wonderful thing, it sounds like. I'm getting these messages on my screen. Maybe that doesn't matter, but I guess it doesn't matter to what you're seeing. I'm getting the admit messages and things going across my visual here.
I'm sorry, Laurie, that's because you're a co-host, so you're seeing all these messages, but please ignore those. Sorry about that.
Okay, thank you, Ralph. All right, well then we'll begin. When Nancy asked me to tell her what I wanted to talk about, I thought about this question inspired by Bill Viola. What is this? What is it that draws us to make a mark, to leave a trace, to notate, to inscribe, to write, to draw, and to paint? What is it that brings us together? And so I wanted to start by talking about some of the things that I go to for inspiration over and over again. And one of them is the cave paintings, because as far as we know, anyway, they're our oldest artists and storytellers, the oldest ones that we know about. And this cave painting from the Chauvet Caves is over 40,000 years old. And still the lines are so beautiful, so calligraphic, and so alive as they were that long ago. And when I think about impossible tasks and what these cave artists went through, so often it involved being in very narrow, dark tunnels, only tall enough to crawl on your hands and knees for a mile or maybe 2 miles in the dark before you would get to the cavern, and then somehow have the scaffolding, the paint, and the inner imagery to pay tribute to these images. And I thought, the running lions is a good image for impossible tasks, and the effort they made to get to the sacred cavern. So I've been influenced by ancient art and writing. I've studied a lot of ancient scripts. This goes back to about 1500 BC, influenced by Egyptian scripts. And this one is Etruscan. I think a beautiful example of Etruscan writing, which we have much less of. And as many of you know, the Etruscans were there in Italy, and they borrowed from the Greek, but we don't have a lot of information on them or a whole lot examples of their writing except in their tombs. And this happened to be a monument from a tomb. But because I'm about to go back to Italy again and teach, I've been very interested in studying the Etruscan forms, and I keep finding things and modifying an alphabet that I'm bringing to the students. Some of you will have done this with me. But for example, in this example of Etruscan writing, what am I noticing? Well, I'm noticing sometimes the O shapes are very small and there's little dots. And I'm just noticing different shapes and imagining, this is jumping way ahead, of course, but imagining how I can incorporate them into an alphabet. And so I start working in my sketchbooks based on what I'm seeing, and I keep modifying it. And fairly quickly, I get to writing words so that I can see how things belong together. And you can see here I'm experimenting with having the O be very small, like I saw in the manuscript. And this is another page from my sketchbook. I love my Chinese practice paper with the red lines. So some of that is in my sketchbook. But these are all me. How I go about developing an alphabet takes a long time. And here you can see in my painting that this research into old writing often enters my painting. So here I'm using one of my alphabets I call the hieroglyphic alphabet, and there's a close-up of it here. It's scratched into the surface, so it's scratchy. But here's a study in my sketchbook of what I call my hieroglyphic or arcana alphabet, even playing with the idea on the right-hand side that the Egyptian tombs had a false door that would go in and out of the tomb, just playing with shapes in my book. And now this is an image some of you may have seen of mine, the Wheel of Time. And this calls to mind, for me, thinking about how myself and some of the rest of you and some of my friends I was talking to, we hurry to get here. We're most of the time absorbed in linear kind of time where we're skittering to get from one thing to the next. But we know it's not the only kind of time. It's the time that we operate in order to get here together. But there's other kinds of time. The Greeks called linear time, they had a word for it, chronos, or chronological time. And then they had a word, kairos, which they called opportune time, or the time that's when you know it's just the right time to do something. It might be more related to synchronicity. And then Joseph Campbell talked about time too. He talked about forever, for example, how forever is something that goes on and on and on and on. And yet, he said, eternity has nothing to do with time. And everyone's had that experience when you get so absorbed in something that you lose track of time, or you're taken outside of time. And it's a lovely experience, I think, that keeps bringing us back. And stories are like that. Stories can take us into another kind of time. Whenever we hear the phrase, for example, once upon a time, or once in a faraway place, this is how we can let our imaginations be ignited and go into a different place. Now, most of you are familiar with the Greek stories, like this story, the story of Psyche and Eros. And in this case, we're entering the story with the 4 impossible tasks that Aphrodite, the goddess of beauty, gives to Psyche. The reason for this is that my studies, a lot of them were in mythology and religion and psychology. And so for me, in my work, the stories give us a framework, a way that our work and our lives is not only about our small little personal successes and failures, but it gives us the bigger picture. And anytime I can find the bigger picture, I'm generally both more connected and happier. So we're going to start with the first task that Aphrodite gives to Psyche. Are you all with me? Is this making sense so far?
Yes.
Yeah?
Mhm.
Yeah? Okay. Speak up
Yeah.
if it isn't,
Love
because
it.
it's so familiar to me that sometimes I can skip along too fast. But anyway, now we're in this bigger picture of what it means to be a maker and how we can find a context for all the obstacles and ups and downs we experience as makers. Because while it's true that it's a very solitary affair being a maker, we have to do it alone, it's also true in a certain way that we can't do it all alone, that we all depend on each other and the resources that are out there. So anyway, in this part of the story, Psyche, which means breath or soul in Greek, has been abandoned by her lover, Eros. She's totally grief-stricken, full of remorse, self-doubt, despair. And she's wandering in the desert until finally she realizes that the only way she's going to find her way back to her lover is to make amends with his mother. Eros, the goddess of love, is the son of Aphrodite, the goddess of beauty. So Psyche, with great effort, eventually finds Aphrodite's temple and pleads with her for mercy and pleads with her to help her find her way back to her lover. And Aphrodite's response is to grab her by the hair and throw her on the ground and put her in a giant room with a vaulted ceiling filled from floor to ceiling with 7 kinds of seeds and say, you are to sort these before nightfall or it's death for you. So Psyche sinks down in the corner of the room. She cannot figure any possible way to sort all these seeds by nightfall. And in spite of all her efforts to stay awake and try to think of something, she falls asleep. And then when she wakes with a start and opens her eyes, she looks to the door of the room, and the last of the ants are crawling out, having sorted every seed. So,
Laurie, we're not seeing any images. Are you?
That's coming.
Okay.
Yeah.
Isn't this Stiltskin?
This image?
The story is very similar to Rumpelstiltskin, which was way later, of course.
No, this is a Greek story. The story of Psyche and Eros. Yeah, it's not a fairy tale. Those came later, you're right. But a lot of the stories have similar themes in terms of how we get in dilemmas and how we get out of them. So you can tell me if this is not working, but I found it was working better to tell the story and then show images. So this, I gathered images from various artists and calligraphers that remind me of this idea of sorting the seeds, which is really about, for us makers, how do you make order out of chaos? How do you make order out of loss, despair, and chaos? This is something that we have to keep returning to. It's not done once and for all. So it's a theme of the creative pattern. And this image by Jennifer Bartlett from her book In the Garden is just a wonderful image of a pile of seeds to sort for me, and also calligraphic marks just repeated over and over. And this is Paul Klee, of course, who you all know, and it looks like the painting now has structure. There's spaces to put things in, and the seeds have been sorted. And so really what you're doing when you feel overwhelmed or the impossibility of something, or everything feels too chaotic, sometimes you just need to know where to begin. And so this is me in my little tiny sketchbook, starting with one word or one color or one idea. Sometimes that's all it takes. So I start with one word, indigo, and one color, and just start playing. And that gives me a place to begin. Or here in my sketchwork, I'm taking the Koyukon Indian word nulato, which means the place we are tied together. And just once again, both of these are also with a limited palette, figuring out a place to begin. And then I just looked around at different artists. I think many of you know Chihuly, the glass artist, and I believe in this piece, he's got a pencil in each hand and he's drawing with both hands at the same time. Just a lovely thing to do. This is a great image for me of creating order out of chaos. When I had the opportunity to teach in the south of France, which is the only time I've ever been able to see a cave painting, I landed in Bordeaux, and there was a gallery there that I just happened into, and it was full of these very large paintings by Claude Legoutte, who, I don't know, Rael, if you've ever heard of him, but I've never found anyone yet that knew his work. This work is from the 1970s, and there were very large pieces of canvas or paper that he had made marks on and cut them apart and put them back together again. I think it's a lovely idea for working with this theme. And I'm sure many of you know Gemma Black. This piece of hers reminded me of seeds being all sorted. And during the winter here in the Kentucky woods, in the dark Kentucky woods, I gathered seeds. That was part of my theme this winter. And the yucca plant has seed pods that look very much like a flower. So that's what this is. And at the bottom, I'm writing in one of my alphabets from a poem by Galway Connell. It says, "Everything blossoms from within." And that's another earlier painting on sorting the seeds. And here's some more seeds I gathered from the woods, maple seeds, and more yucca seed plants, seed pods. So you can see this has been a theme for a while, but another way that those of you who have been in my classes will be familiar with in terms of creating structure, because creativity is such a big thing. How do you bring it back to something manageable? Sometimes I just make sections in my sketchbook and start playing in a little section of it, making marks, and once again, using a limited palette. And there's another one where I'm actually making sections that I'm filling with writing. At the top is an older, I called it my Celtic alphabet. And this is a detail of a larger piece from that time as well, filling up sections, having a little palette, limited palette, and filling up sections of writing. Very satisfying. But I have to say that, because I haven't said it yet, is that I'm almost always writing words. I'm not just making marks. And for me, I think it's the language, the poetry, the invocation, that keeps me connected, because I'm writing things that really matter to me. And if I was just making shapes, I think I would be less engaged. And then the last image for making order out of chaos, sorting the seeds. These are Chinese yam seed pods that I found in the woods and made into a mobile. So that's the first task, sorting the seeds. It has to do with spring and earth. Every task in my mind is associated with a season and an element. So now we're coming to summer and water, and the second task, which is to gather the golden fleece. And so when Psyche returns to Aphrodite, she's not pleased that she's sorted all the seeds, and gives her a more difficult task. She says, now you have to go into this valley where there's a pasture, and the pasture is filled with sharp-horned sheep, fierce of bite, and they're covered in golden fleece. And what you have to do is go get the golden fleece from these fierce rams and bring it back to me. So Psyche sets out, and on her way to the pasture, she sits down by a river and begins to weep, thinking about throwing herself in, because she knows she's no match for these vicious rams. But she sits there for a long time and listens, until it seems the reeds by the water speak to her and say, wait, Psyche, don't give up yet. Just wait until dusk. All the sheep will go to sleep, and then you can gather the golden fleece from the thorns that surround their pasture. So without even having to face them or confront them directly, she's able to gather the golden fleece. And this is a small encaustic painting that I did that reminds me of thorn trees. These images are going to be more in the feeling for me of summer and water. And this one by Gunther Ludwig I just love it. It's so powerful and calligraphic, and also the feeling of danger about going in to the pasture, to me, to my imagination. And this is another artist I discovered when I was traveling in Europe, in Scotland. Joan Erdley. I've never found anyone else that knew her work either, but she did these beautiful abstract landscapes. And this one just reminded me of fields and golden fleece. I put that in. And this is another favorite artist of mine, Antoni Tapies. And just notice how many of these artists do use mark making in their work, but not in a self-conscious way, in a way that it's actually part of the painting. And in my imagination, there's a barrier going into the field here. He does a lot of wonderful work. And so the second task, Summer and Water, has to do with intuition, cultivating intuition, trusting your own voice, because when Psyche's sitting there by the river and hears the voice coming from the reed, she's hearing her own voice, and she's getting direction about how to solve the dilemma that she's in without having to directly confront it, without having to have a huge confrontation. She finds a way to solve it by waiting. And so sometimes it's time to wait, and sometimes it's time to act. We all know that as makers. I've heard so many of you say at different times, how do you know when you're done? Or how do you know when this is finished? How do you know when it's time to wait and when it's time to go? And so for me, what I do when that question comes up is I just pause and wait, because I always know I can go back, and I often go too far if I don't wait. I think, oh, I wish I hadn't done that. So this is cultivating that interiority that creates depth in your work. And the moon is a great symbol of that interiority, that feminine interiority. And these are some paintings of mine that are just evocative of summer and sun and golden fleece and sitting and listening, because I was thinking about this idea that presence is always reciprocal, or it's not presence at all. I mean, I'm really just taking in this idea, but it's very powerful for me to notice that it's not just this idea that's talked about so much now about, well, we have to be present, or we have to, it's deeper than that. It's that when presence happens, there's some response. There's something happening from the other side. That's why we have in the West the muse. We don't have another way of talking about that sense of otherness or sense of presence that shows up when things just seem to be going. I think that's a really important idea. It's another detail of this painting was actually 8 feet long, but that idea of waiting and dusk. Some more. This you probably can't tell, but the whole painting is covered in writing, the whole thing. You can't tell scale either, but the writing is very tiny. But I am writing words. You can maybe see in the background there. And It's another one that's evocative of field and the feminine and the moon. And this is a friend, Joan Anderson, who I taught with at Naropa University, and it seemed like a great image for trusting your own voice. There's no one like you. You know, we all think we need to be a certain way, but the thing that you have. This is a more recent painting. I'm listening for what you want. So that's the second task in the
Laurie,
creative.
At this time, there are two questions, if it's fine to ask at this point.
Yeah, great.
One of the, and again, reminded everybody, please use 3 question marks before your sentence. Thank you. One question was, how big are the paintings of your work? The ones basically that you're showing us today. And the second question related to that, from another participant is, are you working on panels or canvas?
Yeah, I'm sorry. I should have put more details, I guess, in the slides, because most of the paintings that you're looking at are probably in the realm of 4 feet by 3 feet or something like that. That last little one, this one's 12 inches by 12 inches. And this one's only 5 inches by 5 inches. But the rest of them are pretty big. This is on wood, and these are on wood panels, but I also do paint on canvas. Some of them are on canvas. Those happen to be on wood panels. Is that okay?
That is great. Thank you.
Okay. So then Psyche returns to Aphrodite, who gives her yet another more difficult task. And Aphrodite hands Psyche a beautiful crystal goblet. This third task has to do with the season of autumn and the element of air. So she hands her a crystal goblet and she said, now what you must do is fill this crystal goblet with water from the river Styx. And as you all know, the river Styx is in the underworld, and it only comes up above ground, up here on this earth, in one place only. And the place that it emerges above ground is at the top of a inaccessible mountain crag that is guarded by dragons that have eyes all over their bodies that never sleep. So Psyche gets to this inaccessible mountain crag. But now, unlike when she was by the river, she doesn't throw herself down on the ground in despair, but she looks up toward the heavens and calls out to the heavens for help. And lo and behold, the king of eagles hears her cry and comes and swoops down and picks up her crystal goblet and fills it with the black water of the river Styx and brings it back to her. So now we have this image of wholeness with the light and the dark in one object together, the crystal goblet and the black water together in one place. And so for the artist and the maker, this, I think, is also this third task with the eagle coming in is also about those times in the process where we need to step back from the work that we're doing, where we need to have an aerial view, where we need to turn something upside down or start backwards or let it catch us off guard, that kind of thing. There is that time for needing to step back. And at this point in the story, with Psyche calling out to the heavens instead of throwing herself down in despair, she's becoming aware that she is in collaboration with the unseen. So this is a painting, now that you all have asked me. This is on wood, and this is 12 inches by 12 inches, and this is a series of paintings that I did on the major arcana of the tarot. But I look at this as an image of being in collaboration with the unseen or the helping hands. And this is a friend, Harriet Good, whose work I love, and seems to me a great image of both the crystal air, the autumn, and calling out to the heavens, Psyche calling out to the heavens. And Jules Buck Jones, I don't know this person, but he looked like he made this eagle out of calligraphic marks. So there's our eagle. And these are some images from my work that remind me of this idea of when I'll give you an example for myself. I know that at a certain point and working on a piece of work, I'm just obsessed. You know, I can't get away from it. I can't decide what is right to happen next. I just need to step away. That aerial view of the eagle. So that's what this reminds me of. Now, this painting is probably about 6 feet wide by 4 feet tall, I think. And here's a detail of it closer up. And that's another detail from a different perspective, because this task is also about how, when we get stuck, we can remind ourselves that we actually can change our perspective and remember that we're part of something bigger. It's not just me and my little thing. The sky and the moon, and in my imagination, the eagle's wings. This is part of a painting that's also on wood, that's probably about 3 feet square. And this one's bigger, maybe 5 feet by 4 feet. And it's called I Hear Music in the Air. And, you know, that feeling of being able to look beyond ourselves, look to the heavens, the crystalline air. Also, the feeling that can come when working for a long time of receiving, that we're open to receiving, that there's this idea that if we prepare ourselves, we will be received. There's a koan, a Buddhist koan, that says, one hand does not call out in vain. So there's some, even when nothing's happening, and even when it seems like all it is lost, I find there's something good about being able to remember that there is a reception, that presence is reciprocal, even if it doesn't happen, or often doesn't happen in the time that we think. And also, I am writing words all the way through here. This is my dream alphabet, and I'm writing with a tool that any of you who have been in my classes know, a shell. All the words have been written, I think, with the shell.
Excuse me, Laurie.
Yes.
This is Raul.
Yes,
P-
Raul.
I'm not sure what the name of the person is, Piva SCH, but she asks, what medium are you using? Is it watercolor, gouache, or acrylic?
Okay, none of the above. Most of my paintings are oil.
Okay.
Yeah, Most of my paintings are oil paintings. I find that the most luscious material to work with, although I do also work in acrylic. And sometimes, because you can put oil on top of acrylic, but you cannot put acrylic on top of oil, sometimes I'll start in acrylic and then add oil. If I'm just working with the surface and getting going, but most of my paintings are oil. Thank you, Raul.
Thank you, Laurie. And then Valerie asks, do you prep your wood panels in any way before beginning a painting?
Yes, I do. I usually first put gesso down, but I'm also very fond of there's a very good quality Venetian plaster, and it has to be really good quality. It's very, very creamy, and often I'm very tactile. I like to touch things. I like to touch my paintings, and so often I'm starting with touch, and as most of you know who've ever been in my classes, I'm also very fond of closing my eyes because it gets me out of my head. I'm most often in my head. And one of the quickest ways I can get out of my head is just by closing my eyes. So I often do also use Venetian plaster and sanding. I have a big, a sander. So I'm going back and forth like that, those kinds of tools. Does that help?
Yeah, thank you. Thank you, Laurie. It sounds like
Okay.
there is quite a process to prepping, I guess.
Yeah, it's all part of the process, really. It's a good question because for me, it's all part of the painting. I'm not even necessarily looking at it like prepping, if you know what I mean. I might throw some paint into the Venetian plaster, for example.
Does that have a texture to it, the Venetian
Oh,
plaster?
yeah, it does. A very nice, but I put it on like with a same thing you'd put on the wall. It's made for walls, like texturing walls. So that flat tool that you would use to texture walls, that's what I use to put it on.
Oh, I see. Okay.
Yeah.
Lorinda Moholt also has a question. Do you have each of your personal alphabets memorized? Do you remind yourself, or do you remind yourself of each letter with a cheat sheet?
Oh, yeah. Well, mostly I have them memorized. Now it could be that if I haven't used an alphabet in a while, I go back and look at it. But when I'm working, I like to be able to be fluid with the writing. So mostly I'm not looking at anything when I write. Yeah. And often I do have my eyes closed.
Okay. Yeah, it seems pretty spontaneous from your
Yes, that's right, Raul, because I think that's where I feel most connected, probably, is when I settle down and I'm not trying to strategize anymore about what I want to happen, but I'm going more from the idea of something already wants to come and feeling into that. That is much more deeply satisfying to me. And I think, I mean, you all might have different experiences with this, but in my experience, I think it's one of the ways that we can add depth to our work is by not knowing what's going to happen or where we're going, which is why these impossible tasks are helpful, because really they are about willing to take the risk to go where you think you're going to fail or you don't know what's going to happen.
Yeah, that's true. That's good advice.
Mhm.
And then Emily Hay asks, For these large text-dense paintings, do you typically start with specific words or phrases, or do you start with an image and then allow the words that intuitively follow?
Yeah. Oh, Emily, it's so nice to hear from you. So mostly I'm being intuitive with what I write. Now, as a lot of you all know, I've memorized a lot of poetry. So sometimes a specific line might be working on me. I'm listening for what you want. It would be my joy to give it to you. I might start out with something like that and then just see where it takes me. But for me, and everyone, like that picture of finding your own voice, it's so important to not listen to me except in the ways that are helpful, because everyone's way is so different. But for me, it's very helpful to start with phrases or ideas that open my heart.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Another question, we're getting a lot of questions now. Alexandra Disler asks, when you're writing on the paintings, is it automatic writing that's spontaneous in the moment, or do you start with a text you want to write on each painting? I think you touched on this in your previous response a little bit.
Yeah, it's almost always I'm finding out what I want to write by writing. Now, there are some exceptions, like I only showed you a little detail of the 8-foot long one, which was on canvas, the one I call Temenos, which some of you may have seen images of. But that one on canvas, I just did not know what I was going to do with such a big painting. And so I just start writing. And then that was a case where I had memorized a poem from Christian Wyman that had really touched me. And so that's what I started with, but I had it memorized. So my hand might start writing that, and then I might go somewhere else. But it was kind of a mantra. So sometimes that happens, but mostly it's not that often that it's formal, like I'm just getting this text in. I wait to see what's going to happen. Was that clear?
Yeah, very. And thank you for answering those questions. I'm sorry for the interruption. I think
Oh, well, it's helpful. Thank you.
Yeah, I'm sorry. Thank you.
Oh. Okay, so all right, we're on the 4th task. Are you all ready?
Yes.
The 4th task, of course, is the most difficult. Psyche returns to Aphrodite. She's got the water of the river Styx in the crystal goblet, and Aphrodite's going to really put her to the test, because the last task has to do with winter and fire, and it's about going into the underworld. And that's hard. It's hard for all of us. I mean, it's basically risking going into the dark, which all creation stories are about. When you think about being a creator or being a maker, and you think about all the creation stories all around the world, none of them say in the beginning it was light. They're all some version of, and there was darkness upon the face of the deep. Or the Maoris in their creation stories had 7 different kinds of night that they go through. But it's that willingness to go into the dark and into the unknown, out of which creation emerges. But it's not easy for us. And the other problem is it's easy to get lost in there. That's I think why we need to know how to reach out for the presences on the other side to not get lost in it. But anyway, in this task, Aphrodite says, okay, Psyche, now you've got to go into the underworld. And what I want you to do in the underworld is you're going to go to Queen Persephone's castle. Persephone's the queen of the underworld. You're going to go to her castle and you're going to bring me back a jar of magic ointment from the underworld. Well, Psyche's smart enough by now, having gone through what she's gone through, because we learn by these ordeals. This is how we grow, right? That's why we always do the thing we're not supposed to do, because that's how we grow, right? So she knows, first of all, how do you find the door to the underworld? How do you know how to go down? How do you know where to go? So she's wandering in the desert again, and she sees a tower that she's never seen before. And she climbs up to the top of the tower and she hears the voice in the tower say, I'll show you the door to the underworld. This is the door to the underworld. But wait, there's a couple other things. First of all, when you get down there, Psyche, you are so kind. You care so much about other people. You cannot turn right or left. You cannot respond to all these people down there that are in terrible situations that are going to be calling out for your help, because if you get distracted, you'll never make it out. So sometimes as makers, some projects or some moments in life require everything of us. Just require everything. And so this is so dangerous that focus, how do you keep focus is a big question. That was one thing. The second thing the tower tells her is that when you're going on such a dangerous journey, you have to know what to take with you to protect you, or you'll never make it out. He said, there's going to be a Charon who takes you across the river Styx both ways. You have to have a coin for him each way. There's going to be a three-headed monster, the Cerberus, that guards Queen Persephone's castle, and you have to have 2 loaves of bread, one for the way in and one for the way out, to give to the Cerberus. And when you get inside Persephone's castle, there's going to be feasting and wine, and you're going to be so hungry and so thirsty, but you must not eat any of the food or drink any of the wine, or you'll never make it out. You have to have only bread and water. So this is a big task for Psyche, and she goes down into the underworld. She keeps her focus. She doesn't look right or left. She gives the Charon the coin. She gets across the river Styx. She gets to Queen Persephone's castle. She throws a loaf of bread to the Cerberus. She gets inside the castle. She doesn't partake of the feasting and wine. She gets the jar of ointment and she starts on her way back. She gives the loaf of bread to the Cerberus. She gets to the river Styx. She gives the coin to the Charon. And then she starts walking along the path. And far ahead now, she can see shining daylight just coming in. And too soon, as us humans often do, she thinks she's made it. She thinks she's already there and she can relax. So she opens the jar of ointment. We always do the forbidden thing, right? And as soon as she does that, she cries out and falls into unconsciousness. But she's near the opening to this world up here, and Eros, who's also been doing his own work, hears her cry and comes down and brings her up, because Eros is a god, brings her to the heavens where the gods and goddesses live. Aphrodite's thinking, okay, she's all right now. And so as the story goes, Eros, which is love, and Psyche, which is soul or breath, together give birth to Pleasure, a daughter named Pleasure. And that's such a great image for, I think, this work, that as corny as it might sound, to bring love and interiority to the work does bring pleasure. It's where the pleasure is, I think. But now for the images, this is Holly Roberts, an artist some of you might know, and I thought this was a great image for going down into the dark is not easy. She works a lot with collage too. This is the cover of a book that was recently purchased by the Harrison Collection there in San Francisco. And I'm thinking of this as the door to the underworld. I've done many doors, it seems, in my time. This one's at the Akademie der Kunst. That one was on paper. This is on wood, 12 by 12. Again, this is part of the Tarot series. And I thought it was a good image for knowing what to take with you. Anytime you're going into uncertainty, to bring something with you. It's a very old idea. A talisman is a very old idea. This is another 12 by 12 from that series, and I thought it was a good image for the Charon going across the river Styx. And this is an artist that I admire a lot, Meinrad Craighead, who lived in New Mexico. And I thought this was a great image for what it takes, especially in our times, to keep focus when there's so many distractions, which is what Psyche had to do. She had to keep her focus. And how do we do that? This is a friend of mine, Brother Martin, that I work with sometimes. And he did this in a class he was in with me up there at St. Meinrad. And it reminded me of that, seeing the shining light just ahead of you on the path, but jumping forward a little too soon. And another fantastic artist I admire, Anselm Kiefer, you know, such a powerful image of how this last task, winter, fire, the underworld, is about fire and transformation. And that very, very old idea that transformation does come out of the fire or the dark or the ending, like Jorge Luis Borges said when he became blind. You know, one must remember that when one door closes, another one opens. And this is the last image. This is another 12 by 12 called A Last Bird Crosses Over. And this is a good example of, I think, in my work, of an image that just kind of emerged rather spontaneously. I remember where I was sitting when it happened. It doesn't happen like that often with me, mind you, but I feel like it is an image of inviting that dimensionality and interiority into your work, that when we can feel that larger dimension, everything is different than when we don't. So I'm imagining that last bird crossing over, finding her way. And that's the end of my talk. I would love to hear any questions. I hope if some of you are interested, you'll join my online class. And I hope to hear your questions.
Laurie, or for everybody here, if you hold down the apple and or if you do a screenshot on that last slide, Laurie, if you go back one, they'll have the information on your online class. So people.
Oh, okay.
not
Want me to
that-
do a screenshot?
Well, no, for them, so
So
that they,
what do I press for them?
no, I mean, for everybody in the audience, if they wanted to have your
Oh,
website
okay.
in the online class, it's right there if they want to do a screenshot. One of the questions that came up earlier was about your asemic writing, and how often are you using asemic writing, or are you using words to some of the different poems that you have memorized?
Yeah, that's a good question because I've been making up alphabets and writing words since I was a little girl because I was one of those children that was always keeping a diary, you know, one of those diaries with the little gold keys. And at some point, I was quite certain that my mother was reading my diary. So I started writing in code. It was an early introduction. But I think it's also with me the pleasure of making letter forms. But asemic writing is a relatively new trend, and it seems to have not much to do with content. So I think it's something different than what I do. Because as I was saying earlier, for me, and maybe it's because I think in language a lot, writing the words or being connected with what I'm saying is part of what keeps me engaged in the work. I don't mean by that I don't ever just make characters. I do sometimes, but mostly if you're asking about my paintings, I would say it's my words or my poems or somebody else's poems or just stream of consciousness, but mostly not just letter forms, if that makes sense.
Right. In other words, a lot of times I think so. I think you answered it, because a lot of times you're using your different alphabets that you've that you're
Right, but
studying.
when I'm using them, what I'm saying, Nancy, when I'm using them, I'm writing words.
Right.
I'm not just making characters. And I think asemic writing, correct me if I'm wrong, but I think traditionally asemic writing has nothing to do with content. You could just be making shapes on the page.
Exactly. And I think that's what Cindy Parker was asking, because then she wrote back, she goes, that's what I was asking about. So you've answered her question.
Oh, good, good.
Good. And then another question that came up was if you could talk a little bit about the encaustic painting that you referred to earlier in your presentation.
Yeah, well, I have another good friend who's a painter, Rodney Hatfield. And I love going to visit his studio. He was born in Appalachia, and I just love his work. But he has a sign above his workspace that just says "Shut up and paint." But when I go to his studio, it's like I look around, and it's kind of an experience of getting permission to do things differently, and so that painting came because I said, Rodney, I don't want to get any more equipment. I don't want to get, I don't want to have to heat up the wax. I use cold wax a lot. I like wax, so I use wax a lot in my work, but I didn't want to get any more equipment. He goes, oh, you don't need much, just this little hot plate and this. So anyway, he talked me into it. So I've done a little bit of experimenting with encaustic painting, but not a lot. And that was one that I liked.
Good. I'm going to ask you to stop sharing, and I'm going to remove the spotlight so we can actually see you.
Oh, okay. Well, there we go. I can't find my cursor. Let me see.
Oh, there we go.
There we go.
Did it. So at this point, are there any other questions that people have? Oh, do you have any, let's see, so, oh, Gaston, who was in the workshop this summer, wanted to know if you have any book recommendations. It's very inspiring to hear the stories you shared to frame this presentation. I agree.
So now I'm sorry, who asked that?
Gaston from the summer workshop.
Oh, yeah. Wonderful. Okay, so books on stories.
Gaston, if you want to unmute yourself and ask Laurie.
Hi, Laurie. No, I
Hi.
just wanted things to read. It was really inspiring to see how you frame the presentation through these stories that you used. I was just thinking, what should we read?
Okay, so I think you probably know I've been very inspired by Joseph Campbell, who wrote a lot on mythology and stories. But when I was working on the Psyche and Eros story, I read every version I could find. I'm trying to think of, I have all kinds of versions of it in my mythology shelf, trying to think of specific ones. The ones that come to mind, well, Robert Johnson was a Jungian psychologist who worked with this story in a similar way, thinking about how the story is a template for finding your way through. Robert Johnson is one, but more than that, I read actual accounts of the stories, and Joseph Campbell. There was a much earlier account that the author's not coming to mind. But if you email me, I'd be glad to send you my list of books that I have on it.
Laurie,
I love
Edith
what? What did you say?
I don't know who that was, but we'll ignore it.
Hi, Udo. Hi, Brookie. Hi. Oh, so good to see you. Udo, do you have a question?
If I had one, I would send it.
Okay. Good.
I'm
All
short
right.
on words right now. Sorry. Glad to see you too.
Are there any other questions for Laurie? One question here is, so Raul, ask your questions. I see your list of the names of the people's work you have shown.
That question was asked by someone else. I can't remember.
Well, Laurie,
Mary Sherman asked, do you have a list of the names of the people's work you have shown?
So maybe what I could do is send out a list of the names and a list of books that some of you all have asked about with the stories.
thank you.
I wonder what the best way would be to get it to you all.
We're going to be sending out a link to the recording, and possibly Raul, you'll be sending out the link, a PDF to go with it, or what would be the best way?
If Laurie sends me the list, I could include that in the email that's going to be going out from Eventbrite, including the link to the recording.
Okay, so I'll make a list of books and artists.
All right,
How's that?
good.
Okay.
All right, well, at this point, I don't see any more questions. What are your go-to colors?
So it's not always the same. It changes.
With the seasons?
Well, maybe not with the seasons so much as I have been using indigo more lately. And oil paint too, my students hear me talk about this, but quality of saturation of color can make a lot of difference in the feeling of pleasure with the color. And I have oil paint in indigo made from one of those makers that still makes them by hand. And it's so thick, so saturated with color. It's very satisfying. But probably in general, you know, I start with the iron oxides, you know, the yellow iron oxides in a similar way that, you know, they used to always traditional painting, which I haven't gotten to study really. So some of you all know more about it than I do, but the idea of the underpainting being a warm kind of sienna or iron oxide, I often start with that. And I love the combination. Depends on the medium I'm working with, but even if I'm not working with oils or acrylic, even with watercolor, you know, the warm yellow iron oxides with the light gray tones, whether it's from watered down sumi, if it's the water substance, or if it's with acrylic, that it's a beautiful combination. If you want to just start simple, I love that. And I think a lot of the people whose work I'm familiar with in Europe have an affinity with that as well.
Laurie, someone wants to know, have you read Jung?
Oh yeah. Oh yes. A big influence. I went to school in Paris at Sorbonne when I was young, but I brought with me Jung's 600-page volume on psychology and religion and read the whole thing. And I majored in psychology and religion in school. So I'm influenced by that, and also the more renegade Jungians like James Hillman and Robert Bly and Michael Meade, the storytellers. Definitely. And I have Jung's Red Book, which is amazing. And I'm very much, you know, back to when I was a teenager, I started writing down my dreams, and that staying current with the dreaming world is such a profound change in the way the daylight happens for me, if I'm in touch with that. It really makes a difference. Most of my students have heard me say this, you know, I'm much smarter when I'm asleep. The things that come in dreams are, wow, things I just couldn't think of when I'm awake. But they make a difference. Yeah.
Thank you very much. And Evelyn, who just asked the last question about Jung, she is the president of Friends of Calligraphy and is the inspiration for our lecture committee that we started at the beginning of COVID, when we realized we're all homebound and there's so many people around the world that have something great to say, like Laurie. So Laurie, thank you again. It was wonderful to see you. Our next speaker in November will be Laura Donna Zaga. I don't have a date yet, but stay tuned. You'll find out about it on the FOC website or through Eventbrite. So stay tuned. All right.
Thank you
Thanks
so
very
much.
Steve.
Thank you for coming, all of you. I really appreciate it. And Raul, I don't know if I have your email or not, but I'll be in touch with you.
Yeah, I can send it to you later on. But thank
Okay.
you very much, Laurie.
Okay. Bye for now.
Thank you again, everybody. Thank you.
Bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Do you want to stop recording?
Thank you.
Yeah.
Thanks so much.